Portland City Council renewed its support for two of the region's biggest planned freeway transportation projects today. The commissioners signed off on the preliminary design for a new I-5 bridge over the Columbia River, and they signed back on to the I-5 Rose Quarter project more than 2 years after a very public falling out with the Oregon Department of Transportation. Let's start with the bridge. About 2 months ago, the Interstate Bridge Replacement Program, that's the bi-state team developing the new crossing, well, that group released a preliminary design that included light rail and a total of 8 lanes on the bridge. The team's next step is to put their proposal through the federal environmental review process with the goal of starting construction in late 2025 or early 2026. But before they can do that, they need approval from the bi-state legislative committee in charge of the project, and they also want a thumbs up from local agencies and governments like TriMet and the City of Portland. The Portland City Council is now the 5th local group to approve that plan, but they added a pretty long list of conditions ranging from broad ideas like greenhouse gas reduction targets to specific design choices like the inclusion of bike and pedestrian resting zones with seats and lookouts. Mayor Ted Wheeler also has some concerns, particularly about the bridge height. It's kind of a delicate dance they're trying to do because the new bridge has to be high enough to allow all the river traffic to fit underneath. But if it gets too high, the slope could become too steep for trucks and light rail. Not to mention that with PDX right next door, the Federal Aviation Administration might object if it's sticking up too high in the air, I guess. The U.S. Coast Guard issues the permits and has the final say on height, according to the program administrator, Greg Johnson. And so far, they have not been thrilled. The agency recently rejected a preliminary proposal from the team for a 116-foot high bridge, saying it was, well, too low. Not to worry, Johnson says. Think of this as an opening offer in a complex negotiation. The previous plan for a new bridge, which was scrapped back in 2013, was ultimately able to get approval for 116 feet. The current project still has a couple of years to reach a similar deal, but when Wheeler pressed him about what would happen if the Coast Guard and FAA ultimately disagreed, or if the Coast Guard mandated a height that would make the bridge too steep for light rail, Johnson had this to say.
Conversations will then probably go to the political arena, where there are other folks such as congressional and U.S. senators who are also very interested in this project, who once again will weigh in and make their feelings known on this.
So stay tuned for that. The other big vote today was to rejoin the Rose Quarter project. That's the plan to add auxiliary lanes to I-5 through the Rose Quarter and then build caps or lids on top of the freeway. The second part of the plan was intended to reconnect Portland's historically black Albina neighborhood, which was split in half by the original construction of I-5, one of many examples of how the U.S. freeway system destroyed black communities. The nonprofit Albina Vision Trust was working with the Oregon Department of Transportation to help with that goal. But then the group withdrew its participation in July of 2020, saying that ODOT had not been taking the input seriously that they offered. The City of Portland followed suit a few days later, ordering city bureaus to suspend all work on that project. Governor Kate Brown then convened a series of meetings with stakeholders last summer to try and get things back on track. And the groups recommended a new design option called Hybrid 3 that expands and strengthens the project's proposed freeway caps through the Rose Quarter, allowing for new construction on top. The changes were enough to bring everyone back to the table. Here's Commissioner Joanne Hardesty.
Buildable highway covers were not part of ODOT's original plan. They had proposed 3.5 acres of bits and pieces over I-5. With Hybrid 3, we have gained 8 acres that will do more than just cover I-5. These acres provide the kind of city street grid that other Portland neighborhoods take for granted.
Still ahead, we're digging into the KGW vault and looking back at this.